Today I want you to explain Docker versus Kubernetes. What is actually the difference? Well, here's the thing, boss. A lot of people think it's Kubernetes versus Docker, but they're wrong. It's not Kubernetes versus Docker. It is Kubernetes and Docker. Look how cute that is. What? That's my bad. They are not alternatives. They solve completely different problems. Docker packages apps and Kubernetes manages thousands of those packages at scale. Let me show you the problem that they both solve. Imagine we're building a Netflix recommendation engine like this. Now this is us. We're on our laptop, our local development environment, and everything is working perfectly. We've got Python 3.11, we've got TensorFlow 2.15. Everything is golden. All the right libraries and the right versions, and our recommendation engine works beautifully. So we then push the code to the staging environment, and this is where everything goes wrong. You see, the staging server has Python 3.9 because the data science team set it up 2 years ago and hasn't touched it at all. But the code that we need, we require Python 3.11. We need those features. We need to be able to type hints or match statements, things that don't exist in Python 3.9. So the moment we try to run things, everything just crashes, like Lance Stroll in every Formula One race. Yes, I've seen this before, but this is just version management. What's the actual problem? Oh, boss, it gets way worse. So USSH into staging, manually update Python to 3.11, install the missing libraries. Finally, things are working. So then you push the code to the production environment. Now your production server 1, that has Python 3.11. That's all good. But it has TensorFlow 2.10. This is because that video encoding team deployed this service last month and pinned that version. Now our recommendation engine, that requires TensorFlow 2.15. The neural network architecture changed between versions, so the model is going to fail to load. So then you make some manual deployment changes and you change TensorFlow to 2.15. Now your service works, but you've broken the video encoding team's pipeline. And let me tell you, these developers, they're pissed. Look at them, they're jacked. These are not the type of people you want to mess with. Hold up. Production server 2 and production server 1, they are both broken. Production server 2 has Python 3.10 and completely different dependency versions. You have different failures on every single server. This is the problem. Every environment is different. Different Python versions, different library versions, different configurations. So you constantly have to have manual dependency management to fix broken servers and conflicts. This is the problem when people say it works on my machine, but it doesn't work on anyone else's. Local, staging, production, they all have to match together. All right, I get the problem now, but how does Docker actually fix this? Docker actually solves this by packaging everything together. Docker is what we call a containerization platform. Now I'll walk through this example so you can understand what Docker is. Now if we look at the difference between these two, right? On the left, you've got your host server, and this has Python 2.7 installed. It has old libraries, it conflicts everywhere, and this is where all the version problems come in. Now what Docker does is it creates a container. This is an isolated package that runs on the host, but is completely separate from it. The container brings its own Python 3.11, its own TensorFlow, its own libraries, everything your app needs. The host could have Python 2.7. That doesn't matter. The container is isolated. It runs in its own environment. That is how you eliminate version conflict. Okay, so how does this whole container thing actually work? Can you walk me through that? Well, here's the basic Docker workflow. You start with a Dockerfile, and this is a text file, kind of like a recipe with instructions that tell Docker what to pack. You run a Docker build, and Docker reads that Dockerfile and follows the instructions. It then creates a Docker image. This image is a template, a snapshot. In this case, it's an 850 megabyte file that contains everything frozen together. Python 3.11, TensorFlow 2.15, your recommendation code, all your bundles together. Then when you want to run your service, you use Docker run. Docker takes this image and then creates a container. And the container is your actual running process executing your recommendation service. The key is though, you build the image once and you can run identical containers from anywhere. Your laptop, staging, production, every container is exactly the same. Show me what a Docker file actually looks like. Like, how do you tell Docker what to package? Honestly, that's a good question. Don't worry about memorizing every single line, but just understand what we're doing overall. So this is what our Docker file is going to look like. Now, each line in this Docker file is essentially just an instruction. So something like start with Python 3.11, set up the working directory, copy and install the dependencies, and that's things like TensorFlow or Pandas or Fast API. We're then going to copy our code, expose port 8000, and then set the startup command. This is our Docker build process. We then run Docker build, and Docker executes these instructions and packages everything into an image with all the versions locked in. Then Docker run uses that same image everywhere on our laptop, in staging, in production, production, it's the same Python, same TensorFlow, same libraries, same code all over the place. That's how we eliminate the this works on my machine problem. Okay, so Docker packages things consistently. When is that enough? Well, boss, I mean, Docker alone is perfect when you're running something small scales. So something like this, where you're running a single server, maybe 5,000 requests a day, you've got predictable traffic, you got 3 containers, it's easy management, SSHN, Docker run, everything works great. But Netflix isn't running on one server. What happens at scale? This is exactly where Docker alone fails. So imagine episode 9 of Stranger Things drops. I know it's going to drop. And there's a massive spike, like 500,000 requests a second. People want this episode. Our servers are on fire. Everything is overloaded. We need scaling everywhere. We need 2,000 containers. Which server has capacity? Everything is going to fail at scale. Look at the chaos. You've got servers across East, West, Asia Pacific has crashed. US West, you don't even know the status of your service. You're doing everything manually. You have to SSH in everywhere. You got to run Docker commands. You got to update the load balancers manually. Every time a container gets a new IP, you got to monitor for crashes, try to balance traffic globally. All of these things are adding up, and meanwhile, your customers are seeing a buffering screen. This is an orchestration problem. You can't manually manage thousands of containers across multiple regions. So what is the solution then? How does Netflix manage thousands of containers at scale? And this is what Kubernetes does. Kubernetes is an orchestration platform. Think of Docker as the tool that packages your app and dependencies into a container. Kubernetes is the system that manages those containers across many machines. It's a control plane that handles all manual work automatically. Starting containers, stopping them, restarting them when they crash, scaling them during traffic spikes, routing traffics to healthy ones. All you need to do is tell Kubernetes your desired state. So something like, I want 2,000 containers running on my recommendation service across all times, across the US East, US West, Asia Pacific, all of the above. Kubernetes is going to make that happen, and it's going to keep it that way. Let's say a container crashes at 3 a.m. I'm asleep. Kubernetes is going to detect it in seconds, so no one gets one page. Stranger Things drops the episode and then traffic spikes. Kubernetes automatically adds more containers across regions. If traffic drops the next day, then Kubernetes automatically scales down, all without you SSHing in or running bash scripts. So I can just sleep. I'm chilling. Kubernetes manages containers through a few key concepts. The first of which is a Kubernetes pod. Now, a pod is just a Kubernetes wrapper around your Docker container. So if you look at this, inside the pod, you've got your Docker container running the Netflix recommendation service on port 8000. But the pod is going to add things like metadata around it, labels like app recommendations or the region, resource limits like 1 CPU core or 2 gigabytes of memory, or restart policies set to always. Kubernetes doesn't manage bare Docker containers, it manages pods. Second way is Kubernetes deployments. And a deployment says, I want 2,000 pods running across regions. You give Kubernetes a configuration file, a YAML file, with your desired state. Kubernetes then reads that and gets a Kubernetes scheduler to get to work. It creates pods across different regions, let's say 800 pods in the US East region, 700 in West, and 500 in Asia Pacific. Kubernetes distributes these based on the capacity available in each region. Now, the key part here is Kubernetes is constantly monitoring the actual state versus the desired state. If it sees 1,998 pods instead of 2,000, it knows that 2 crashed, and within 10 seconds, it automatically schedules 2 new pods on the service with available capacity in the right region. That way, you can continue sleeping, we can chill, and you don't have to SSH anywhere. Kubernetes is going to enforce our desired state automatically. So it just keeps these containers running. What about traffic routing? I mean, these pods have different IP addresses across 100 servers. Right, that is the third key concept, services. Look at what happens. When a user requests something like recommendations.netflix.com, that hits the service. The service is a stable endpoint that never changes. Now, behind the scenes, pods are restarting, they're crashing, they're rescheduled to different servers. Every time a pod restarts, it actually gets a new IP address, and you can't hard code pod IPs. The service is going to handle this automatically. It discovers and load balances to all the pods. So in US East, it tracks 800 pods with different IPs, in West 700, and in Asia 500. So when a pod crashes and restarts with a new IP, the service updates it immediately. User requests always go to a stable service endpoint. The service routes to healthy pods automatically. And when Stranger Things drop and the traffic spikes, what happens then? You see, this is where Kubernetes autoscaling comes in. Kubernetes can scale in 3 ways. Horizontal scaling adds more pods. Vertical scaling gives each pod more CPU and memory. And cluster autoscaling adds more servers. The most common is horizontal pod autoscaler, or HPA, which adds more pods based on CPU usage. So the more CPU usage, the more pods. Now here's how that would work work in action. So you have a normal evening, and let's say you have 100,000 requests per second. 2,000 pods running, your CPU's at 60%, everything is fine. Then, of course, stranger things drops. Now suddenly we have 500,000 requests per second. The same 2,000 pods, they're trying to handle 5 times the traffic. CPU jumps to 95% and the systems are struggling. This is where the horizontal pod autoscaler detects CPUs above the 70% threshold. It sends a scale-up signal to Kubernetes, and the Kubernetes scheduler gets to work. So for US East, it creates 1,200 more pods, US West 1,000, and Asia 800. Each pod takes about 10 seconds to start up, so within 3 minutes, a total of 3,000 new pods are running. Now, of course, the next morning, traffic is going to drop. People are asleep. The autoscaler sees the CPU at 45% with 5,000 pods. This is too many pods for the current load. So HPA sends a scaled down signal, and Kubernetes gradually removes the pods. The service stops sending new requests to the pods being shut down and waits for in-progress requests to be finished. Then it removes those pods and we get back to 2,000 pods, which is our optimal state. All with zero downtime, and users never saw any errors. All right, let's circle back to my original question now. Dockers versus Kubernetes. They're not competing, right? Have you not been listening to anything I said? Of course not. Dockers create the containers and Kubernetes orchestrates them. They're complementary layers. Here's the workflow. You write a Dockerfile, and then you run a build that creates your Docker image with Python 3.11, TensorFlow, and your app and code packaged together. You push that image to a registry like Docker Hub. Then you give Kubernetes a config file that says run 2,000 pods of this image. Route traffic to those pods and scale up when CPU usage is high. Kubernetes pulls your Docker image from the registry and creates 2,000 pods across multiple regions. Each pod is going to run a container from that image, and the service routes requests to them, and the autoscaler monitors and scales based on traffic. Docker packages, Kubernetes orchestrates. Look, intern, where are you actually learning this from? Because I'm impressed. I just go to learn.nextweek.org and do a bunch of projects. You can search up things like Docker and do some of these projects. Every single project has step-by-step guides. Oh, wow. And then as I'm doing the project, I add in screenshots and I can get documentation that I can customize, plus share to any platform like LinkedIn, TikTok, GitHub, anything. Oh my goodness, that documentation looks stunning. You've got the job. Thanks, man. Hey, I appreciate that. This video took a lot of work and I am so tired right now, but I'm doing it for you guys. Now, you watching the video, make sure you subscribe.